Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2. Hello and welcome to Commsverse. This session is called Ensure Your Team's Deployment is Compliant with Erica Tolley.
Thank you. Yeah, hi, I'm Erica. I'm a Microsoft MVP based out of Seattle in the States. And during the day, I work on the fast track compliance team as a subject matter expert. So this is an overview that we like to give to all of our customers because they're oftentimes not aware of all the compliance features that exist in Microsoft 365. And then, of course, with Teams being the hot topic of the year, they oftentimes want to understand how those compliance features relate to Microsoft Teams and how they can leverage them to make sure their Teams deployment is compliant. So with that in mind, first, I want to say thank you to our sponsors. Without them, this conference wouldn't be possible. I know we're near the end of the conference, but please do check out their Teams channels and virtual booths. I know I've found a lot of great compliance vendors that I'll be following up with after the conference. So today in this session, we're going to cover 6 topics. So first, we're going to go through some of the compliance and regulatory standards that we should think about for Teams. Now, Microsoft 365 as a platform has gone through audits and attestations to ensure it's compliant with some common standards. And these are oftentimes something you need to present when you're audited. So we'll go through how to access that documentation and how that whole situation works. Then we're going to talk about information barriers, which is a compliance feature in Microsoft Teams that allows you to prevent 2 groups of people from talking to one another. Or if you're an organization with very strict requirements, oftentimes we'll use it to allow 2 groups of people to talk to each other. Then moving on, we'll talk about retention policies and how we can use them to either keep information or delete information. So if you're of an organization that's required to delete their team's chats and conversations, say after 30 days, then this is the feature you'll use to accomplish that requirement. Then we'll go to communication compliance, which is the feature that you can use to supervise communications in Microsoft Teams. So if you want to make sure that there's no harassment or threatening behavior going on in your Teams chats, or you're required to monitor communications for certain groups of people, like that's a common compliance requirement in finance to make sure there's no insider trading going on. Or if you want to monitor Microsoft Teams to see if people are sharing sensitive information, communication compliance can help you. And then we'll talk about discover and respond solutions, which in particular is EDiscovery, audit, and search, and how Teams works with that. And then finally, I have some slides about the security features that play well with Teams, because in order to be compliant, you do need to think about security. A lot of compliance requirements require. A lot of them say that you need to be sure that people can't access your information if they're not supposed to access it, and you need to protect the information to be compliant. So we do always want to keep security in mind when we talk about compliance. So with that, let's just dive right in. So before we get started, we always need to talk about licensing. Because a lot of the features are in the E3 license, which is kind of the base license that most organizations have. It's equivalent to the A3 education license, or if you're in the States, the G3 government license. But then some of these features are only available in what I like to call the advanced licenses. So for example, Microsoft 365 E5, Office 365 E5, and then there's some standalone SKUs you can buy that they just introduced in April, such as the information protection and governance features, etc. So Aaron Dinage out of Australia has a really great GitHub project where he posts these wonderful diagrams. And I know that's the only way I can keep track of what has what license. And then also Microsoft released some new documentation in April that goes over these features in a lot of detail so you can really understand what's included in what license. I've highlighted the ones we're talking about today in a black ring so that you can see kind of where you fall with these features. And then I'll also point it out as we go along. Now, it is important to think about compliance and regulatory standards, of course, when thinking about compliance for Microsoft 365 and Teams. So Microsoft 365 as a platform supports more than 90 regulatory standards and laws. Now, just some specific ones that are related to the UK would be like the Cyber Essentials Plus, DPP, FACT, FCA. And then we find more information about how Microsoft has been certified against these standards and laws and the actual audit reports in the Service Trust portal. So just as an example, if I clicked on the link in that slide, it would bring me to the documentation page about all of the Microsoft compliance offerings that they've achieved as a platform, which of course includes Microsoft Teams. I've highlighted just some of the UK examples there on the page. But if you click on one of those links, it's going to take you to a detailed overview page that tells you what is the requirement, which I know a lot of IT people appreciate because I'm not familiar with every requirement. And then it also talks about what Microsoft has done to comply with this requirement. And then if you do need to have documentation to present to your auditor, if you go to the Service Trust portal, you can actually access the exact audit reports that you can hand then to your auditor to show how the Teams platform is compliant. So just as an example, here is a SOC 1 Type 2 report for the Office 365 microservices, and you could download that report right there. You can also follow specific reports that you're interested in. So when they're updated from year to year, it'll notify you and you can download the latest version. Same thing if you want to know about how, for example, Office 365 maps to GDPR controls, you can download that report just here, and you can actually see a very, very detailed mapping of how Office 365 maps to each individual section of GDPR. Now, there's a ton of great information in here. Please do check it out. Now, if that's a lot to keep track of and you're not sure exactly where to start with compliance in Office 365 and Microsoft Teams, please do check out the Compliance Score, which is a feature and a solution that's available in the Compliance Center, which I'll show you how to get there in just a second. Now, the Compliance Score is similar to the Secure Score, if you've heard of that previously. And it tells you some key improvement actions of things that you can implement and features you can enable in Office 365 to become more compliant. Now, they do have assessments that are specific to certain regulations. For example, of course, they do have a GDPR assessment available. And if you add that assessment to your score, it'll give you the improvement actions that it recommends you should complete to be GDPR compliant. So if you're not sure really where to get started or why you should do something, the Compliance Score is a great way to get started. Now let's start to dive into some of these individual features. So we'll start with information barriers. And then just as a reminder, this is available in the more advanced compliance licensing, such as the E5 license. So why might we use information barriers? So there's a couple scenarios that I've implemented with my customers. So first of all, you could use them to avoid a conflict of interest. So where I see this used a lot is in finance organizations, where you don't want to have the day traders talking to people who are placing a valuation on different stocks, because if they could talk to each other, they could potentially collaborate to artificially inflate or deflate the price of the stock. So it's just better if you could use something like information barriers to keep the two groups from speaking to one another. Another scenario that we see a lot in education for more the primary schools is making sure that high school kids can't talk to middle school or elementary school kids. That would be quite inappropriate, and it's not good. So you could use information barriers to prevent those two groups of people from speaking to one another. There's lots of scenarios where we use this, and you can see some additional ideas on the slide. So how does this work? So basically, information barriers group people together and then create an ethical wall or a policy to either allow them to talk to one another or prevent people from talking to one another. Now, one person can only be a member of one group, so you can't have the same person in multiple groups for information barriers purposes. So on the left-hand side, you could see, in a strict company, we might want to make sure the research team can talk to the product development team. But in a finance organization, maybe you don't want day traders talking to marketing, as an example. So we configure those to prevent it. So what do information barriers cover? So right now, you can set up policies, and these are exactly what they prevent from happening. So for example, if you try to search for a user and you're not allowed to talk to them because of an information barrier, they're just not going to show up in the search. Or if you try to add them to a chat, it's going to give you an error message saying that you can't do that. It's also going to prevent you from sharing a screen or calling them as well. And then coming soon, it was announced at Ignite last fall that information barriers will soon apply to other areas of Office 365, such as with email communications or SharePoint files. Today, it's only available for Microsoft Teams, including chats, conversations, and then meeting and call functionality as well. So once you've set up the barriers, we need to have the technology check who is a member of what group periodically, because maybe a new person joined the company or somebody switched teams. These groups of people are not static and they can change. So when does it actually check in with the policies to make sure the people are allowed to communicate with one another? Well, that happens when, of course, members are added to a team, when a chat is created, and that means a new message in a chat, not creating the chat group itself. So whenever a new message is sent. It's also when somebody tries to join a meeting, start a screen share, phone call, or coming soon accessing files in a SharePoint site. So next are some screens showing you what this would look like. Information barriers is very hard to demo, so I took some screenshots just to make it easier and save time. So here in this screenshot, I'm searching for somebody who I'm not allowed to talk to because of a barrier. And it's just going to tell me that it couldn't find any matches, and that's because you need to talk to an IT admin. Now, could this message be a little clearer? Probably, but this is what it looks like to the end user today. If you try to join a meeting and you're a segmented user, it is going to give you a little bit more helpful error message saying that it's actually a company policy that's preventing you from joining the call. So that might help the user understand it's not a technical error, it's due to an actual policy. Now, this is a situation where Enrico actually changed departments. He got a promotion, and he's now in a group that isn't allowed to talk to his previous group. So when he tried to send a message to the group, You can see he was actually automatically removed from the chat by the system. And then once the SharePoint functionality is launched, if you try to access a file that's stored in a SharePoint site, you'll get this access denied message. And then again, it's saying it's due to an organization policy rather than, say, to a permissions error. Now, to set up information barriers, we do have to use PowerShell today. It's not something that's available in the user interface yet. But I do think that this Excel file that they provide in the documentation, which is linked there on the slide, is extremely helpful. I am a PowerShell novice. I would say not even 100 level, maybe 50 level PowerShell user. And I was able to use this information to set up my information barriers. So, you copy and paste the information in step 1, and then you use step 2 to fill out your segments, and it'll build the PowerShell script or command for you. So you can just copy and paste to create the segments. So, please do try it out. So that's it for information barriers. Next, we're going to talk about retention. So for retention, it's extremely important to understand where Teams data actually lives at rest, meaning where it lives when you're storing it. This is because you need to apply retention to the location where the data actually lives. You can't, unfortunately, just apply retention to everything in Teams and have it cover, conversations and files and meeting information. So this is a diagram from the Microsoft help. I think it's extremely helpful, and it's linked to there on the slide. But at a high level, most information in Teams is either kept in Exchange or SharePoint. Now, meeting recordings are kept in Stream, but unfortunately, we don't have retention available in Stream yet, so I kind of am conveniently ignoring that. So when you are sending messages in Teams, if you're messaging in a conversations area, in a Teams channel, those messages are technically stored in the Exchange group mailbox that was created in the background when you created the team. If you're messaging people one-on-one, then a copy of that chat is kept in each user's mailbox. So every user has a copy for compliance purposes. If you share a file in a team channel, that's kept in SharePoint. And then if you share a file in chat, that's kept in everybody's OneDrive. You can see some of the additional detail here about where stuff is stored, but for the most part, you're going to be using retention policies on Teams chat, Teams conversations, and then OneDrive files and SharePoint files. So if you would like to create a policy, they're called retention policies, but they can also be used to delete content as well. These are the options that are available to you. Now, I put this slide in here for your later reference, but I think it is better to actually see it in a demo environment. So I'm going to show you how to do this in the Compliance Center. So the Compliance Center is an admin portal, very similar to, say, the Teams admin portal, where you go to configure and maintain the compliance solution functionality. You do need to be granted permission to this portal, and tenant admins don't necessarily have access to all of these solutions. So if you're a tenant admin, say in your demo environment, and you go to the Compliance Center, you might not be able to see everything. You actually won't be able to see everything in here. So just keep that in mind. To manage retention on Teams conversations, I'm going to click on Information Governance. And then I'm going to click on Retention. And I'm going to create a new retention policy. Just to get through this really quick, I'm not even going to pretend to make a name. And let's use the common scenario that we want to delete our team's chats and channel messages after 30 days. So I'm just going to select that. You do have an option for created or modified, but for teams, you're just going to keep it at created. And then you'll choose your locations. So you can see you can use this to apply retention in many places, but we're very interested in the team's channel and chat messages. Now notice when I turned on Teams channel messages or chats, it unselects all the other boxes. You cannot have a retention policy that works with, say, SharePoint and with Teams channel messages at the same time. You'll just need to create 2 different retention policies if you want to manage both files and Teams channel and chats. You can also apply it to specific teams or specific users, and that's up to 1,000 separate teams or 1,000 separate users. But I'll just turn it on for everything. That's the most common thing I see people doing. And then please note it's going to take up to 1 day to apply the retention policy to your chats and conversations. A couple other caveats. It's going to be about 30 days, not exactly 30 days. There's essentially a 7-day timer job that's running on the back end of Teams, and it evaluates your retention policies every 7 days. So it might check them on a Thursday or it might be a Monday, just depending on your tenant. So it might be, 36 days before that before the service registers that these Teams chats are expired and then deletes them. So it's not an exact science, and I just want to point that out. If I wanted to do this for real, I would create the policy, but I'm not going to do that in my demo environment. Just have a slide that you can use as a reference for the retention policy locations, as well as the limits when you're, if you want to get specific about different policies for different locations. And then you can have up to 10,000 policies per tenant. All right, so that is retention and information barriers. Now let's move on to monitoring Teams chats and conversations for different reasons. So we do that using communication compliance, which is an E5 or an advanced feature. So there's 3 reasons why people use communication compliance. So first is to comply with corporate policies. The gold standard is the anti-harassment or code of conduct policy. We want to monitor employee behavior because if something bad does happen, we need to prove to the courts that we did our diligence in protecting our employees. The next would be for risk management, specifically for making sure that people are sharing sensitive information appropriately in Teams. Now, if you want to block sensitive information from being shared completely in Teams, make sure no one can send or receive that information. You'll use a DLP policy for that. But there's a lot of situations where it might be reasonable that people are sharing this information, but you just want to kind of keep an eye on it. So you use communication compliance for that. And then lastly, if you just need to provide ongoing monitoring or oversight for a regulatory reason, you can use this as well. So there's 3 things you can do in communication compliance. So first, you can quickly build your policies using pre-configured playbooks. Second, once you find a potential violation of the policy, say someone's harassing someone in Teams, there's built-in workflows to be able to deal with that appropriately. And then lastly, of course, this is compliance, so everything is audited and you can pull the audit trail to make sure you're showing either internal audit or an external auditor that you did in fact do everything like you should. In addition to Teams chats and conversations, you can use communication compliance to monitor several conversation areas. You can see the different options there on the screen. I'll also point out we can import third-party data, like for example, in the financial industry, Bloomberg Messenger or Bloomberg Mail is very popular. You could also monitor company company Twitter accounts or a company Facebook page or LinkedIn page as well. So let's just do a live demo for this also. So I'm just gonna here click on communication compliance. And if I wanted to say monitor for offensive language, I could quickly get started with that. If this does interest you, 2 days ago at Commsverse, I did do a deep dive session specifically on using communication compliance to monitor for harassment in teams. So there's a full session on that. But you can see I can use these playbooks where it automatically fills out a lot of the settings for me, and I would just need to complete who we're going to monitor. I do, of course, have a couple of those policies set up in my other tenant. Sorry, I had a little breakage there, so I had to build it over here. Now, don't make fun of my fake harassment messages because it's actually quite a difficult demo to build. How do you be bad enough that it shows up automatically in the filter without being so offensive that you can show it in a demo? So here it is. So this is obviously not a good thing to say. So I could notify the person automatically and just tell them like, hey, this is not appropriate. Please review the code of conduct. And I can send that to them directly from the tool. Let's see, I think Grady is the one. Yep. Grady has, oh, that's not working. He has 4 times he has violated the policies in the past. So it might be time to escalate this. I can add people from like HR and legal here, and I could easily send them a notification saying, please take a look so they can take further action. If it's a very serious situation, like maybe for insider trading purposes, I could escalate and create an advanced EDiscovery case directly from the solution, where I could select all the emails and it would create the case, and I can see if maybe there's other funny business going on through an investigation. There's a lot more you can do in here. So this was a nice surprise that came out this week. Very soon, you'll be able to use Power Automate to create your own custom workflows based on what you find in here. So that's exciting. But at some point, you'll just end up resolving the issues. And then all of these emails are kept for 7 years by the solution. So you have a bit of a paper trail there. So really quick, I do want to show you, this is what the user history actually looks like. If it had not caused an error, it'll just tell you, what action was taken, and I could click to view the actual email violation. Also, if you are looking at a Teams conversation, this is an example, it'll actually show you the whole conversation thread, a thread being, a post and then all of the replies, or if it's a chat, it kind of has some logic as to, everything that occurred on the same day would be shown as one single thread. But this allows you to see the context of the conversation. And then it also gives you a lot fewer items to review. So you're not having to review every single chat message. You can review a whole thread as well. That's the really fast overview of communication compliance. Like I mentioned, if you're interested in learning more about that, please check out the other session. So now let's say that you have maybe EDiscovery or discovery and legal compliance requirements around Microsoft Teams. Let's go into those as well. So there's quite a few solutions that are under the Discover and Respond compliance umbrella in Office 365. So of course, first we have our two EDiscovery tools. These tools allow you to place content and people on a legal hold. It allows you to search for content, and it allows you to then export the results of those search, which is your discovery. There's a more lightweight version in the E3 license that allows you to do those three things. And then the E5 advanced eDiscovery solution is extremely powerful. I could give a whole half-day workshop just on this tool, but it allows you to do some additional analysis on the data, to cull it or reduce the volume of information that you're exporting so that it's more relevant to what you're doing. So instead of having to export everything, you can just review the data to mark it for relevance and only export the relevant information. There's a lot of AI capabilities that allow you to do that manual review much more quickly and accurately. And then, also with Teams, in advanced eDiscovery, it'll do that conversation threading that we just saw in communication compliance, as well as it gives you just a lot of like shortcuts for searching for Teams information and for putting Teams on hold. If you're interested in more detail about any of the advanced eDiscovery stuff, just reach out to me. Like I said, it's a giant topic and it's very difficult to cover in 2 minutes. There are some other solutions that you should be aware of. If you have a data subject request for GDPR, there is a solution available in both the E3 and E5 license that allows you to search for personal data in a very simple way and export that either as a manifest or all of the data in an electronic format. Of course, that also includes the Teams data. And then if you need to conduct an investigation, very common scenario would be somebody accidentally uploaded a document to a team that has external users. That document was confidential, it should not have been shared with them. You can use the investigation solution to contain that data spillage and then investigate how far the leak went. You know, did an external user then download that document and email it to somebody? You can search for things like that. And then finally, everything in Office 365 is in a search index. So you're able to search for Teams meeting information, chats, conversations, not whiteboards yet, not stream recordings, but pretty much everything else in Teams. Of course, that also includes documents that are in SharePoint sites and in OneDrives as well. I like this diagram because it kind of explains the difference between eDiscovery and advanced eDiscovery, and then how it relates to the retention and deletion information. So you can see eDiscovery is just providing really the basics of searching for information, preserving it through legal hold, and then exporting it. And then what advanced eDiscovery does is provides you a lot of functionality that helps you decrease the volume, increase the relevance through this process. Now, if you want to get down to a really kind of feature by feature comparison of the Discover and Respond solutions, here it is. Of course, the one that we're super interested in for Teams is this chat and conversation threading, things like near duplicate identification, because if you share a file in a chat, now you have a copy of that file for every person that participated in the chat. So this type of information is really valuable. For organizations that do have some pretty serious eDiscovery requirements, maybe they're getting sued a lot if you're in the US, or they have a lot of, we call them freedom of information requests, but basically if you're a government organization and you have some laws that constituents can request information from you, really for teams, you kind of need to look at more of the advanced EDiscovery functionality, because Teams is bringing information available together from across Office 365. It really does require some of these more advanced features in order to make that actually cost effective and time effective. So yeah, that's my opinion, I guess. Then also, I do want to mention the Office 365 audit log in this talk as well. So you do need to turn on the audit log one time when you have a new tenant, but after that, it is going to collect event information about user performed actions or things users did in Office 365, as well as things admins are doing. So what you can do is select the activities that you're interested in auditing or seeing. You can choose specific users if you like, or specific locations, and then you would choose a date range and click search. And then I usually will export the events to look at them, because otherwise you just have this tiny half screen to look through thousands of events. There are a lot of events available in the audit log. The audit log is kept for 90 days for E3 customers. And then if you have an advanced license, it gives you an option to extend it up to 365 days for some of these activities. So these are just the categories of events available. If I expand each one of these categories, there's a lot of events under each one. In fact, if I look at what Teams activities are in the audit log, you can see these are all events available today. Now they're adding new events all the time. Like almost every week I see new stuff added. So for example, we now have this new analytics report that I'm sure somebody covered in a session here at the event, but we can actually see every time somebody downloads one of those analytics reports. So depending what you're interested in, you can set up, say, I see a common one would be setting up an alert through the audit log when somebody creates a team, or maybe changes the organization settings, since that's an admin activity. You can do that through the audit log. And then if you have an advanced license, advanced compliance license, you can use the new advanced audit features in Office 365, where you can choose certain events from the audit log. You can retain that information for up to a year. And then it'll give you faster access to that data. Instead of it being, anywhere from 15 minutes to half a day for it to show up, it'll show up almost real time. And you can set even more detailed alerts on that. So then for security, this section more has informational slides in it than anything that I'll talk about in detail. But when about a month into all of the work from home situation, Microsoft published a really great article that broke down all of the ways that Microsoft keeps your team's data secure. I think it may have been in response to a certain competitor not being seen as secure or not keeping the data so secure. So I've linked to the article information here on the slide, and then put these as informational slides that you can look more into. So each one of these links will go into more detail about each one of these talking points. So we have information about privacy and security for video conferencing specifically, ways that Microsoft, like foundational things they do to protect your privacy. Some ones that really stand out. So here for Commsverse, we're actually using the Teams live event platform as almost like a webinar software. Well, I'm not sure if you're aware, but if you use GoToWebinar, it's actually tracking your participation in the meeting, and it's telling the webinar organizer if you were multitasking in the meeting, meaning if you had other windows open in front of the webinar. It's also giving them real-time statistics about what percentage of the attendees are actually paying attention. Teams doesn't do that because it sees it as a violation of privacy. Other things to note are, a lot of other companies maybe fund their meeting software by collecting data to then use to personalize ads. Microsoft will never do that. And you can see some other points here as well. And then also, if you want to look at how Microsoft protects your actual identity and account information, here is some additional information on that. And then finally, here's how Microsoft protects Teams against cybersecurity threats. If you are interested in learning more about data loss prevention in Teams or sensitivity labels in Teams, I did a session earlier today specifically covering information protection in Microsoft Teams, so please check that out for more information. And then I think we're almost getting close to time, so I do want to check, are there any questions that came up in the Q&A?
Nothing in the Q&A.
Okay. If anyone has a question, feel free to put it in right now and we can cover it in our last few minutes. Otherwise, I will be going to the post-session breakout room. If you're more comfortable having a discussion about your question, I'm happy to help out. Also, if you maybe think of a question later or you're watching the video on demand at a later time, here's my contact information. I'm always happy to help answer your questions. Compliance is kind of a new topic for a lot of Teams people. A lot of the features are quite new, like communication compliance only came out in January. Please just email me or send me a Twitter DM about it, and I'm happy to help. But with that, that's all I have for today.
Okay. I have posted a link to the session survey in the announcements, and I've also posted a link to the breakout session, which is happening just after the event. If you do have any questions you were too embarrassed to ask on a recording, then perhaps with your hair down and go and hang out with Erica. Oh, wait, we've got something new in.
Okay.
What is the information protection session?
What is the number of it? Let me look on my calendar really quick here.
Yeah, I might be able to get that.
It was 349. Locate and protect your sensitive data in Microsoft Teams. And specifically, it covers sensitive information types, which there's over 100 built-in templates for common types of sensitive information, such as credit card numbers, bank account numbers, SWIFT codes. Well, there's 100 different kinds, so there's a lot. So how can you scan your Office 365 environment to find that? How can you prevent that information from being sent in Teams chats and conversations using DLP policies? And then how can you protect that information in Teams and beyond in files and other places using the sensitivity labels?
And Martin Bum says, great session, Erica.
Thank you.
And I'd have to agree.
It was a very whirlwind tour of all the compliance features, but I find a lot of people aren't aware of what's possible or what they own. So appreciate you joining today.
Okay, and that's the last one.
Great.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye.